People often think that, oh, you're a lawyer, you make a lot of money, you're fine. But we had multiple six figures of debt. I wanted to drop down to part-time hours at my law firm after having my first child. Lawyers are going into debt. We thought we were the only ones who didn't know how to manage money.
Rho Thomas is a lawyer turned financial coach, helping high-achieving attorneys escape debt and reclaim their time. After paying off more than $700,000, she's now showing others how to build wealth without burning out.
I started saying on that podcast that I could help people. I helped this client, and she actually paid off $20,000 of credit card debt.
You learn these skills, you will have it for life.
If you are stuck in a toxic work environment, you feel like you can't afford to leave, then I'm your girl, I can help you.
Can you tell me about Personal Finance for Lawyers podcast, please?
Yes. So Personal Finance for Lawyers actually grew out of a hobby blog that I had. So I got into personal finance from my own journey with my personal finances. And along the way, I started a blog to share the things that I was learning and share our story. To give you kind of the long story short, I wanted to drop down to part-time hours at my law firm after having my first child. My husband and I realized that we couldn't do that because we had a whole bunch of debt. And so that got me started with learning about personal finance. And I was coming across people who were paying off $50,000, $90,000. And this is US dollars. I know that you've got people otherwise. So $50,000 to $90,000 US. We had multiple six figures of debt. And so I wasn't seeing that story reflected. And I felt God calling me to share our story. I knew that we couldn't be the only ones dealing with a more significant debt load. And so I started a blog to share our story. And then along the way, started helping other people around my area, my friends, some of my coworkers, things like that, still on a hobby basis. And then I switched to podcasting instead of blogging, because I was practicing law at the time, and that involves a lot of writing. And so if I'm at work and I'm drafting, a brief, and I've been writing for 8 hours, don't really want to come home and write more. And so when work picked up, a lot of times that blog would get put on the back burner. But switching to podcasting, I like to talk, and I don't get talker's block. And so I could just speak on topics versus writing them down. So that's how the podcast was born. It originally was called Wealthy-esque because it was all about living life like the wealthy do. I have this belief that wealth is about having control of your time. And a big part of getting that control of your time is getting control of your money. But I switched the name to Personal Finance for Lawyers to make it more searchable for people. So that's how it was born. It was started back in 2020 during the pandemic, and I've been going strong for about 5 years now.
Okay, there is so much to unpack here. First of all, it's so funny. I would think that as a lawyer, you talk a lot more than you write. But actually, I guess in the younger years, you write more than you talk. Is that the logic? I have this picture of the lawyer in the US where it's just like objection, and you're in court and you just do stuff. But no, there is actually lots of writing.
There are some people who are in court a lot, but often cases settle before they make it to court. And those settlements often happen because of motions that you've written and negotiations that have happened and things like that. So it was a lot more writing than speaking. And I felt like my job, a lot of it was sending emails, like following up on these requests or sending out this draft agreement for review or things like that.
That does make sense. So back to the personal finances for lawyers specifically. Why is that? Because you mentioned that you started helping a bit everybody, right, with their personal finance. So why did you decide to make the focus shift towards lawyers specifically?
A lot of who I was helping was lawyers. And to give a little bit more color to the story that I told about my personal finances, we thought we were the only ones who didn't know how to manage money. Like, we thought we were the only ones in this position. But having conversations with some of my friends from law school, some of my colleagues at work, I realized that a lot of lawyers don't know how to manage their money. And I think that there is a bit of a gap in the market with people giving personal finance advice, because people often think that, oh, you're a lawyer, you make a lot of money, you're fine. Or sometimes there's even a tinge of shame in it. Like, oh, how do you make so much money and you're having trouble? And because I had been in that situation myself, I'm able to relate to those people, to share my story and to share how we were able to overcome it. And because of gap that I mentioned, I wanted to fill it and help people who were like me just, 10 years ago now.
So my next question was going to be exactly this. You'd think that lawyers make lots of money, so why would they need support with personal finances? But earning lots of money doesn't mean that you're saving lots of money, neither that you're repaying lots of debts with your money. So that all does make lots of sense.
If I can put a little bit more on that too, a lot of times lawyers are going into multiple six figures of debt. And then they're also starting to work later than other people because, if you finish college and you go right into the workforce, lawyers are going, at least lawyers here in the States, in the US, are going to law school for another 3 years and taking on even more student debt on top of that. So they're starting the workforce later with a higher debt burden. And then because a lot of people have been in school for so long, oftentimes you're not able to work while you're in school because the workload is very rigorous in school. Then it's like the first time that they're earning money and it's like, woo, I'm free. I can do this. I can buy this. And so a lot of people start buying things and spending, and then they're racking up different expenses. And so then they're not making that progress on their student debt.
That does make a lot of sense. Do you have out of curiosity, do you have some stats, like on average, how much does the typical lawyer, let's assume that their parents are not paying for school, right? How much do they go in debt to be able to afford, maybe not the Ivy Leagues, but like on average, how much do you get out of school with how much debt typically?
Yeah, I actually do. The American Bar Association, which is the largest association of lawyers here in the States, did a study on this just a few years ago. And I think it was 95% of lawyers take out student debt and something like 75% graduate with $100,000 or more of student debt.
That's crazy. And so I'm not super familiar with the education system in the US, but like over which period of time are you supposed to pay back this $100,000 plus in debt when you get out of, I don't know, law school at 26, 27, 28, whatever? How much time do you have?
Yeah, so you typically, if you go straight through from, elementary school through law school, you are finishing around 25, 26. And the standard repayment term is 10 years. But then there are also extended payment terms. There are different payment schedules where you can stretch out the payments or lower the payments based on your income. The whole system is honestly very complex here. That's why there are people who focus only on helping people with their student loans here in America.
Fair enough. Must be a juicy business. So another thing that you mentioned was the change of name to be more discoverable. Can we talk about this? So that's discoverability. Not a lot of podcasters actually apply this. So what made you realize that your previous name wasn't optimized for discoverability? And how did you end up choosing the name for this particular podcast?
So in my practice, I was a trademark lawyer. So it was all about protecting brands. And there is this scale of protectability in trademark law. The highest level of protection goes to those marks that are made up, right? So you've got made up marks or arbitrary marks. To give an example, Dove for soap, right?
Yeah.
Dove is a thing, it's a bird, but it's not related to soap. So putting it on soap. Or Apple for electronics. And Apple is a thing, but it's not related to electronics. But then you've got things that are completely made up, like Xerox for copiers, right? Xerox was not a word before. So that was how I decided that I wanted to make up a word. And I think my training kind of kicked myself, I kind of hindered me in that regard because I wasn't thinking about the discoverability piece. I was thinking as a trademark lawyer, I want the strongest protected mark. And it was talking with another former trademark lawyer turned business coach. And I was telling her about my thoughts about making the podcast name something more what we call descriptive, right? Something that describes what it is. So my podcast is about personal finance for lawyers. And I talked to her about changing the name to personal finance for lawyers. And her advice was something that had never occurred to me before. So she said, yes, the highest level of protection goes to those marks that are made up or those marks that are, arbitrary, that are kind of random. But those are also multi-billion-dollar companies that can throw a lot of money behind it to make you associate Apple with electronics versus, someone who has a small business. You don't have that same financial ability to make consumers, associate your mark with your brand. And so
Okay.
she said she didn't see anything wrong with making a more descriptive mark, making a more descriptive name for the podcast, and that it could result in higher discoverability because it's words that people are actually searching. Nobody is searching wealthy-esque, but people might be searching personal finance for lawyers or money for lawyers or something similar.
Oh, again, so much I want to unpack here. So, first of all, those companies, Apple, Dove, right, they started by not being $1 billion companies. So you might think as well, okay, if you want to start with a brand, you might as well just, go all the way and begin there. But I understand for you, it was more of an occupational hazard, which makes sense. We fell into that trap quite many times as well. So you went for personal finance for lawyers. Did you look up like what people were looking for specifically, or you just thought that this name made sense? Like, how did you come up with that specific name?
No, that would make a lot of sense to look up what are people looking for. But no, I just said,
This is a great idea. I didn't do that.
I'm like, oh, this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to change it to that. So no, I didn't put any specific research into what I should call it. I just knew I wanted to call it something that was closer to what people might be searching for.
That does make sense. Now I'm very tempted to look up on Google Analytics how many people look for personal finance for lawyers each and every month. Let me have a look at that. Because I'm sure that's pretty accurate though. Like this describes well what you do, and anybody looking for personal finances, and I want to get into that a bit, like niching down. The fact that you're not talking about personal finance for everybody, but for lawyers specifically. Once lawyers find your podcast and your content, we can say that, they know that this is for them. So that's pretty solid. So once I fetch out those numbers, did you see a difference in discoverability and like people organically finding out about your podcast once you made that change? Or how did you measure it, if at all?
I didn't measure it. I don't think that there was a marked change in the level of discoverability or in the number of downloads that I was getting. But I did notice that so I would search myself for terms that I thought that my potential clients would be looking for. So I didn't have the fancy tools that you have, but searching myself, I was coming up in top search results. And so it's like, okay, if someone is searching for personal finance for lawyers or money help for lawyers or things like that, they're going to stumble upon my podcast. And then to your point about the fact that my podcast is very specific, it is very niche to, I'm talking about personal finance for lawyers. There are so many lawyers who are looking for help with their personal finances, and they have found my podcast or my LinkedIn or, things like that. And they have said that this is exactly what they've been looking for. So I think having that very niche down target there has been helpful in reaching the people that I want to reach.
Okay.
I actually did not start this as a side hustle to make extra money. I didn't know that people made money on live. I didn't know that people were making money. So I'm just like doing my little blog thing, putting it in there, talking about our journey, all of that. And it wasn't until 2020 that I started thinking about possibly making a business, doing coaching, things like that. So I had been blogging for about 2.5 years at that point, just sharing our story, connecting with other people who were sharing their stories and all of that.
Okay.
2020 was when the whole pandemic happened, the world was falling apart, etc. And I had started thinking probably the end of 2019 that I could help other lawyers because remember I told you I was speaking with friends from law school, speaking with colleagues at work, and realizing that people didn't know how to manage their money.
Okay.
We had been on this journey. We started our financial journey back at the end of 2016. So it had been a little over a year that we were on this journey before I started my blog. And then another year or so after that, where I'm having these conversations and realizing that other people need help. And so it's like, okay, well, maybe I could do something to help lawyers. Initially, I thought that that was just going to be creating the blog to be specific to lawyers. So basically the blog version of what my podcast has become. But then in having those conversations, that's when I started doing the, one-off things. Now, when I say I was helping friends, it was nothing like what I do now. It was like how you and I are kind of sitting across the computer from each other. Let's say you don't have a budget. I'm helping you map out your budget and that's it, right? Or I'm helping you map out the debt plan and how long it could take for you to finish paying off your student loans, and that's it. And it was probably around the fall or so of 2020 that I started telling people like online that I could help them. I started telling people that I am a coach and I can do this. I can help you. It was not something that I knew about before, but in that pandemic time, I started learning about how to put yourself out there, there was a coach that I worked with, and her whole thing was about helping you get an idea that you had in your head and your heart out into the world if you didn't know how to do that. And so that was the first step for me. Just let me get it out there because I had that blog. I didn't know that you're supposed to promote your blog. I just thought writing it, people would come, oh, if I write it, they'll find it. That was not the case, right? So being in that program, that coach taught me about promoting the thing that I was doing. Promoting, at that point, I had switched to podcasting because it was something that I could be more consistent with. And so I started, promoting and all of that. Then October or so, I know it was in the fall, I started saying on that podcast that I could help people if they wanted help with their finances. Like, if you need help, I can help you. Reach out to me. And so that was how the business piece started. I didn't actually I might have actually, I think I got my first client at the end of 2020. All of the time is running together now, but the very first client was similar to what I was telling you about, the one-off budget session, right? So I was selling a one-off budget session. It was $97. You come on and I'll help you, figure out your finances and create your budget. Then I started thinking, how many of these one-off budget sessions do you have to do to make? It wasn't something to pay off debt. We were well along the journey for that. This was just something that I wanted to do. But yeah, I was just thinking like, how many $97 sessions do I have to do to like really, make some significant money? And so the next person was a package, but I had never done a package before, like multiple sessions. And so this one was a free client where it was like, let's just see if this works. Let's see if I can help someone get a result. And so I helped this client for, I don't remember how long now, call it 3 months, right? Helped this client for 3 months for free. And she actually paid off $20,000 of credit card debt.
Okay.
And I'm like, I can do that. And so the next client I charged, right? And it was, I wasn't sure about this. So I was like, I'm going to charge, $400 a month. So I charged $1,200 for, the 3 months and, helped her. And then I, kept increasing the price over time. I actually increased the amount of time that I work with clients because there were some clients who they would go through and do everything just fine. There were other clients who would get stuck where we're talking about the same thing. Like one that comes to mind, I remember. One client got stuck on the perfect amount to be in the emergency fund. And so we had like 3 sessions where we're talking about the emergency fund, which meant that we weren't able to move on to other topics. And so at that point, I decided to increase the amount of time that I work with clients. So I started working with them for 6 months at a time. And that gave us so much time and they got much more, in terms of results, they got much further along. And so I was like, okay. So that was that. In recent years, I've experimented with doing kind of one-to-many offerings. So I had a membership at one point. I had a small group program, but I found in doing those that sometimes the clients weren't as, what's the word? Committed? There were some clients who were, the ones who came, who went through, the materials that I gave them, who came to the calls, they got results, but there were a lot of clients who didn't show up to calls or they only showed up here or there. And so I realized I don't like that one-to-many model because of the work that I do with people who need help with their personal finances. It doesn't feel good to me for you to pay me money when you already need help with your finances and then not get the result. And so I've decided to let go of the one-to-many and continue just with my one-on-ones, but I'm taking on fewer one-on-ones so that I'm not feeling like I'm, kind of chained to my desk because I've got, all of these one-on-one clients.
I love to get this question asked to people helping other people with personal finance, because it's like, oh, you're struggling with money. Let me have you pay me money so I can help you with your money. So, and I think you've hit on it already a bit, like I wouldn't feel comfortable charging people money if I didn't know I could get them the results. But how do you, and it's much more on the business aspect than the podcast directly, but the two are intertwined, I guess. How do you showcase value to somebody, right? I'm a lawyer who is, I don't know, $145,000 in debts right after graduation. And I'm like, shoot, this economically doesn't make sense because I just took a mortgage for my home, which added $300,000 to the whole thing. Like, how do you convince people to pay you money for 6 months now to help them with money? If that makes sense.
I don't convince. I'm not going to convince. I have done that before, right? And if I, it's like, oh, come on, Guillaume, like I promise I can help you. And if I'm dragging you along to get you to sign up, I'm dragging you along through the process, and that doesn't feel good either. So there are people who don't want to work with me who, they are not ready to invest in that, and that's perfectly fine because I do have my podcast where I share a lot of free information. I've got my LinkedIn post where I'm sharing a lot of information there. And there have been people who've reached out and told me about things that they've been able to do just watching my LinkedIn post or listening to my podcast or whatever. There was one woman who told me she paid off $200,000 of student loans following my tips.
That's gold.
I was like, oh my goodness, like, that feels so good. Because the thing for me is I want to make an impact on the legal profession. There is a lot of mental health challenges, substance abuse, stress, all of that stuff that's happening within the legal profession. And I'm not going to say that money fixes it all, but I think money helps. Yeah. Not having control of your money definitely doesn't help the situation. If you are stuck in a toxic work environment, you feel like you can't afford to leave, you can't afford to do something else, you just got to sit here and take it. That's not going to do very much for if you're having mental health challenges or substance abuse issues or things like that. And I've seen a lot of people in that situation. And I know for myself how much freedom I had by getting control of my finances. And so if there are people who want that, then come on, I'm your girl, I can help you. And I've got, people that have worked with me who have shared testimonials or who've come on my podcast to talk about their experience, that kind of thing. And so in those conversations with potential clients, I'm talking to them about what their experience has been, where they would like to be ideally, the plan that I foresee for them to get from where they are now to where they like to go. And then we talk about what it looks like to work together. Sometimes there are, some thoughts in the way about like, oh, well, I've got this debt and then I'm going to pay more money and that feels irresponsible or, things like that. And so I show them that it's not that you're paying another expense. This is an investment in learning this skill. And once you know it for the rest of your life. And some people want to go ahead and move forward and others don't. And that's perfectly fine.
One of my favorite clients' quotes, this is a client who gave me this quote. He's a coach as well, complete different space, fitness coach. And he was like, my objective is to be the last fitness coach you ever need. And I'm like, this is so good because fundamentally, I think in the coaching industry, you may have people who recurring revenue is the dream for everybody, right? You get a client in, you have it for life and you make them pay throughout your whole life. But then it means that they never really can do anything without you, which shouldn't be the point of a coach. And what you just mentioned here is like, you learn these skills, you will have it for life, you will be set. I really love this. In your opinion, Rho, so I like the fact that you're 100% inbound and like high intention based only, right? You're not going to try and push your services. How much of a role do you think the podcast is playing in all this, like in your overall content strategy? Because indeed, you're active on LinkedIn, you're getting quite some engagement on all the posts, which is lovely. So you have this overall content strategy. Why? And how important is the podcast in that content mix, in your opinion?
I think the podcast is important because it's a way for people to almost get to know me right? Like you're listening to me in your ears week after week and you're hearing me say things. And, some of my clients will kind of repeat things that I say often on the podcast. It's like, oh, you're listening, like you're getting it. So I think it's really helpful. I don't know if it is the main driver. I don't know if this has come across in the episode, but I have not been super strategic in how I've done this. It's like, I just want to share information and help people. And so some of that is sharing and writing on LinkedIn. Some of that is on the podcast.
Yeah.
But I do know that some people feel like they have gained more of a relationship with me from listening to me week after week.
And that does make a lot of sense. Now, how do you make sure that, if at all, right, people take the next step? Like, what does your funnel looks like? People listen to the podcast, they get advice, they implement the advice, they get some results. Some of them get out of $200,000 in student debt. But for you, like, how do you drive this audience towards, potentially taking the next step with you if they want it? Do you have some call to actions? Do you have some lead magnets? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, so I have done both calls to action, lead magnets. Lately, it's just been I'm sharing this information, and every now and then I'll share about workshop that I'm doing and invite them to join there. But I don't have a specific funnel.
Cool.
I'm sharing this information and we will see what happens. I'd say for the first probably 3.5 years, there was a call to action on every single episode. Sign up for a call at this link. But as I mentioned, I started experimenting with different models, with having the one-to-many and, that kind of thing, with doing a launch and, all of that. So that has not been my consistent piece of like having that call to action. I've just been doing lead magnets and things like that. But I don't do anything super consistently right now because I'm just trying out different things to see what works best for me and what feels good.
And that does make a lot of sense. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced with the podcast role? What were some of the highest difficulties that you've seen and how did you walk around them?
The biggest one, hands down, was a mindset thing.
Okay.
In my mind, when I first started my podcast had to be 20 minutes. There had to be this like set structure. And I remember recording podcasts and I would get to the end and it wasn't 20 minutes. Then I would have to start over and add more to make it longer.
Oh my God.
And it was putting so much pressure on me. And at this point, I was still practicing law full time and I was doing the podcast on the side. So I didn't have a whole lot of time, right? And so getting out of that mindset of this is the set way that podcasts have to be was definitely the biggest challenge for me initially. And then more recently, I'd say it was being ahead with my podcast because for years, I was recording the podcast. My podcast comes out on Friday. I was recording it the week of, and so just within the last year or so, I've gotten to where I've got, a couple of podcasts on deck. And that has been really nice. But I would say those two have been the biggest challenges for me in terms of podcasting. I think probably something that every new podcaster has experienced is just that fear of even putting yourself out there. So I definitely had that.
Okay.
Especially like when I did the very first episodes of my podcast, I started with 3 episodes. And I tell you, my heart was pounding pushing publish on those 3 episodes because I was so nervous. Like people are going to hear me. They're going to hear what I'm saying, which is the point, right? But I think that is probably a universal fear that people have to get over of, going from just being your normal self. I'm just me. Nobody really knows who I am to putting myself out there on this platform with my thoughts for people to judge. Okay. So that has been, I don't feel that anymore. I think as you go through and you do it more and more, you kind of overcome that. But I remember that fear, especially being like really big, where I was nervous to even publish it. And then I felt like it had to be this set way. And then I was just flying by the seat of my pants and hoping that I got my podcast episode out on time.
Of 20 minutes.
Exactly.
And no less, no more. Why this 20-minute mark? Like, what made you go for that specifically?
I think because the podcasts that I was listening to at the time were about 20 minutes. And so in my mind, that's what a podcast needed to be because that was the only example that I had. But over time, I started learning more about podcasting, hearing different people's podcasts that they could be long, they could be short. I was seeing there are some podcasts, Guillaume, they're like 3 hours long, and the hosts are just sitting there and like bantering back and forth and talking about these different topics and all of that. And then there was one that was like 3 minutes, like every episode was something like 3 minutes. And so I realized that it really can be whatever I want it to be. And I very quickly let go of that thought about, the podcast needs to be 20 minutes. I was talking with a coach that I was working with at the time about it. And she said exactly what you said, like, why 20 minutes? Like, who says that that's what a podcast has to be? And so I decided that I was just going to speak on whatever topic I had in mind, and however long it ended up being, that's what it was going to be. So if it was 8 minutes, if it was 15 minutes, if it was 20 minutes, that's fine. And so that's kind of where I went.
That's how you roll now.
Exactly.
So maybe a small tip for our audience listening right now. So first of all, there is no predefined time for the podcast. You do whatever you want. The most common formats are between I think it's 40 to 60 minutes. That's the most popular, at least. But the way we help podcasters choose this is by looking at what the audience is saying. Well, actually, not what the audience is saying, but how the audience is behaving. The best thing you can probably do to see what's the best length for your episodes is to look at the retention rate. If you release 2 hours episodes, but like you have nobody listening anymore after 40 minutes, this might be an indicator that the content is too long, or you need to do something to keep people beyond that. In a 20 minutes episode, if you have 100% of the people still at the end, it means that they might be keen for more. So if you have more, go ahead. But that could be a good way to gauge for your audience specifically what they like the most. But I like that you removed that boundary out of yourself, Rho, and that you made it through whatever it's going to be, right? 8 minutes, 30 minutes, doesn't matter. As long as I give value to the audience, that's what matters. And I really like that.
Exactly. And it's funny because removed that barrier on myself, with it must be 20 minutes. I would get a lot of feedback that lawyers liked that my episodes were pretty short, because in law, at least here in the States, you have to keep track of your time in 6-minute increments. That's how you do your billing for clients.
Really?
And so, yes.
6 minutes? It's not an hour?
6-minute increments. That's 0.1 of an hour. That's a tenth of an hour.
Jesus Christ.
And so it'll be like 1.2 or, whatever it is. But so they liked that my episodes were shorter because they can fit them in quickly in between things without it taking too much of their time.
Interesting. That's crazy. So you need to track every single, not hour, but like increment of 6 minutes of your day, basically.
As long as you're doing client work. Yeah. So, let's say that you're a client and I'm working on something for you,
Okay.
This podcast, we've been talking for 33 minutes now. So that would be 0.6 of an hour.
That is going to be a lot of billing. So I love this. What's the thing I like to ask, Rho, to all my guests is, what do you think is still going to be true in 10 years in podcasting? We all talk about what's going to change and so on, AI, blah, blah, blah. I'd be interested into hearing from you, like, what's going to remain unchanged that podcasters and wannabe podcasters should focus on?
I think the audience wants to hear you. They don't want to hear the contrived, it must sound like this, the big podcasters are doing this, that, and the third, and so I must do that as well. People want to connect with people, and especially if you are using your podcast as a part of a business, people want to know, like, and trust you. They can't know, like, and trust you if you're putting on a show on your podcast, if you've got some sort of facade up. So I would say be yourself, be authentic to who you are. Share your thoughts on things, not things that you're picking up from other people. Sure, you can share things that you're learning, but make sure that you are still coming across and that you're not projecting someone else.
People want to find out more about you, what you do, or if we have lawyers listening to us right now who would like to get their personal finance sorted. By the way, I have the stats here, and not many people look specifically for personal finance for lawyers. But it might be just a seasonal thing. At least we're sure that if they do look for that, they will find you, Rho. So where should they go?
You can find me on my website, which is rhothomas.com, and Rho is spelled R-H-O. And if you happen to be on LinkedIn, that's where I'm most active, and my name is Rho Thomas there.
So we will add all the links in the description, and I will personally add you on LinkedIn right now, Rho.
Love it. Thank you so much for having me, Guillaume. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming, Rho.